So the guy who was head of the operations in Northern California called me one morning. He said, "Dick, I just lost sleep last night. I just couldn't." He said, "Can I see you?" And I said, "Sure." So I drove down to see him, and he said, "Here's the answer." He said, "This is what we ought to do for this. We ought to close this plant, open this, move this person in." He had thought the whole thing through. And I thought it made a lot of sense. So that's what we did eventually. And we wound up with a new president, went through the whole change. My then partner said, "Don't you dare ever go down and talk to the people in the company like that." He was strictly top-down guy. And I said, "I'm sorry, Arthur, I just don't operate that way. I like to get facts from informed people, from a broad section of people, and then make a decision." But anyway, so the answer is it pays. It's one of our main jobs, is to know when to do what. Is that right, Katu?
Yes, sir.
All right, where are you? Over there. Yeah, I mean, that's a big deal, and we talk a lot about it at the partners meetings. In fact, we spend more time on the personalities in companies and character and what's needed than as much on that as on technology and product development and that sort of thing. By the way, I think being a product manager is probably as good a background for running a company as there is. It's really a good one. I told my son, and my oldest son, he wanted to go into really get management training, become a product manager to start with.
That's great. In the back, yeah. Go ahead,
Hi,
please.
thank you, Dick, for coming. I really appreciate it. I was born actually in Shanghai, so I was really happy that you spent a year there. I have one question, but two parts, not related. So the first question is, what was the best decision you made, you think, in the last 40 years? And the second one, I know you have a pretty big practice in the energy area,
Right.
and you obviously have a history background, but I think you have pretty good prediction also for the future. I'm just curious, what do you think of the future of the energy and the clean tech industry here in the U.S. and also abroad? Thank you.
Best decision I have made in the last, marrying my wife. Maybe I should talk about my second best decision. My second best decision was to come out to California. And what had happened is that in Boston, I was with this old line. I was the only non-Bostonian partner of this very old line Boston firm. They're great people. They're 40 years older than I am. And they taught me a lot about the things. And but anyway, it become we merged with another firm, and it got a little bit too structural for me. And I don't like overly structural situations. And I was, I could have stayed there forever, actually. But I was making venture investments one at a time in the outskirts of Boston around Route 128. And I was the executive vice president of this firm at this time, and I went to the CEO, and I said, I think if we're really going to do this as a practice, we ought to, organize a fund, call it $10 million. We had about $20 million devoted to venture kind of investments around 128. And I said, I think that if we're going to do this, we can't do this one at a time. We ought to really have a plan and do it on an organized basis. And he said, yes, I don't disagree with you, but we have all these other priorities to take, precedence over it. And I said, that's fine with me. And anyway, I went home. My wife was visiting her mother. And so I was just sitting in the apartment reading magazines, and I read this magazine, Forbes, that had a whole series on what are called the Money Men. So I was reading this magazine, and I got to this issue on the Money Men. The first article in the whole issue was on Arthur Rock. So I read this article. I said, that guy I like the way he thinks. And so I sat down and wrote him a longhand letter. He said, this is how I spent my life up to now, and so on and so on. And I sent him the letter. My wife came back, and I said, I've done the craziest thing. I've never done this before or since in my life. I wrote this guy a blind letter. And she said, you'll hear from him. I said, really, you think so? She said, yeah, you'll hear from him. The following Monday, I got a call from a woman named Marie. really turned out to be his and my secretary in the long run. But he called me and he said, look, he said, I'm going to be in Boston in 2 months. I'm going to be there with the Boston Society Security Analyst. Why don't we meet? And so I said, fine. I'll cut it all short. It wound up, there were 1,000 letters that came in. Mine was the only one that was handwritten, and I think he had a handwriting expert analyze it. So I think mine must have been up and to the right. But anyway, I got the job. And so I became a general partner, and I was 32 years old, and it was a great experience. I never would have found my way out to California had not that happened. It was great. So about the energy area. So we have, we have this analytical, we have a lot of really smart people and great people with us. I mean, I would put our team, if not as good as anybody, better than anybody even. I mean, we have a great team of people. We do get an F in public relations, but the internal quality of the people we have is second to none. And all the way from the general partners down through the partners, through the interns that we have, and we've vitalized the whole organization with a lot of interns we've done. Kitu, how many seed deals have we done the last year? 30?
Yeah, about 30, 35.
30, 35. I mean, fantastic. We just basically have a lot of great stuff going through the organization. It really is thrilling for me because, as I said, as a history major, I don't know much, and but I love to learn, and all these put you on a fast learning curve on everything. Kitu was involved in Acera. We just got the check in today. Yeah, it was pretty good. And thank you. That was a good outcome. But one of the things that we did in analyzing the energy area, we decided that we weren't going to do anything that competed with fossil fuels, because that was an away game. And so we have these other 3 quadrants that we did map out, and we were very careful about what we did. Is that still working?
Yep.
Yeah, good. And so we were pretty selective. We've gone into, we didn't really go into photovoltaics in a big way, but we went into some concentrators, and we went into some other derivatives, SIGs and things like that.
No biofuels.
No biofuels at all, because that competed with fossil fuels. And so the deals that we did get into, we're staying with. We've had one failure that was actually preceding our mapping out this whole strategy. It wasn't a big thing. But for example, I'll tell you some things that really have us pretty excited. And one of them is sort of secret. It's in stealth mode. I'll tell you about it. And the other one is Bloom Energy. And Bloom, as you know, K.R. Schroeder, and they just had their 10th anniversary. Last quarter, they shipped $200 million worth of product. They'll do over $500 million in revenues this year. They're on their 2nd generation non-subsidized product. I'm going to go see the company tomorrow. This is going to be a very successful company. And it really, when I got out of business school, the hottest technology theoretically was fuel cells. Between that time and the time Bloom started, I saw a few applications of fuel cells that made a lot of sense. The Apollo moonshot, for example, or others. But nothing to speak of commercially. And I think, going back to the drawing board, nothing's perfect. We have to get better every day. Bloom has a great opportunity to be the company that makes the fuel cells a practical reality. These Bloom boxes, I thought one of the really big things that happened recently was that Bloom was chosen as the primary fuel source at a data center with the grid as a backup. That tells you. The company that I can't talk much about is called Tri-Alpha Energy. Kitu knows about it. This is a company that is actually the first company that I think will make fusion energy a reality. And we've just passed our metrics. We've not used one dime of government money. And we just did a $127 million financing, 50 million of which came from Russia, 25 from Rusatom, 25 from Rusnano, and we are into our next demonstration plant. And this is way beyond theoretical. This is very practical. We use proton boron combined with hydrogen under pressure and temperature to create helium, and then it evolves to helium-3. It has no radioactive footprint whatsoever, and it's phenomenal. And I think we have almost an open-ended possibility there. So what we're trying to do in energy is do one-of-a-kind great deals. We're not going to try to get into a commodity business. Stu, anything more you want to say about energy?
I think, you know, the solar space has kind of the,
Go ahead.
Hello?
Yeah, I'd say that the commoditization of silicon has probably hurt the whole solar space some. But there are other areas that are emerging as interesting areas. I'd actually say, you know, more recently I was reading a book by Michael Grunwald on electrofuels. In fact, he's talking about Obama's stimulus package, and one of the things that he talks about in the book is electrofuels, and it's a very interesting area. So we haven't got an investment there yet, but I think it's something that we should take a look at.
Another thing in the energy area that I think is really fabulous is a company called O-Power. And O-Power is a company that actually, for the first time, gets real-time feedback to customers to know how efficient they are being in their everyday lives. So the first best thing to do in the energy area is be smarter about how you use energy. And that's what O-Power does. And it gives incentives to the users by the utilities. Now we have, I think, about 47 utilities now who are employing O-Power as a means of getting energy usage dimensions out to their customers, which make everybody more efficient and give them incentives to do so. So I think it's picking these niches in the energy. The good thing about the solar business, thanks to the Chinese, really is that the cost of solar power has gone way down. They're at their 5-year mark or 10-year mark 5 years early. I mean, actually, so it's become very good for the users, and it's going to be an important, you know, a source of alternate power going forward. I don't think it'll be it'll be somewhat mainstream, but not totally mainstream.
So, Dick, I want to just kind of just get you one question, and then we'll take the audience.
Okay.
So one of the comments that we have, you know, about your firm, okay,
Yeah.
I mean, you have raised several $2.5 billion plus
Right.
funds.
Right.
And the range of investment that NEA is making is, you know, from very small to very large. You
Right.
just cited some of the examples. So how would you describe, how does the partnership really work? I mean, how are you organized, and how do you guys keep this thing going? And because a lot of comment about the VC firms, people are becoming more focused now. I'm just only early stage, or only late stage. But you are all stage, you are stage agnostic. So how does that work?
Well, first of all, let's look at the business. The business is about between a $10 and $20 billion a year business in terms of the funds raised. And there used to be about 1,200 firms in our business. There are now a few under 500. The business has gone through a terrific consolidation. And when you take a look at what Forbes called the top 5 firms last year, we were one of them, the amount of money that was being raised is about the same among all those top 5 firms. It's just that we raise it in one fund, and the others raise it in 3 or 4 funds: an India fund, a China fund, energy fund, or whatever. So the way we like to do it, we call it dynamic allocation of assets. So that if we lay out our plan, we just raised NEA 14, which was $2.56 billion. And we're doing deals from 30 to 35 seed deals at less than $500,000 each to a deal that is of the magnitude we just talked about. You have to have, teams of people in various proficiencies. So we basically are involved. We have a tech team, med team, a life science team, and then an energy team. And so we call ourselves stage agnostic, geography agnostic, and sector agnostic. Those 3 things. And we have a special team that focuses on we call equity, venture growth equity, VGE. And those are companies that have demonstrated traction in the marketplace. They're usually companies that are break even or close to break even or a little better, but have a lot more scale. And we have a special team that looks at those as that could constitute on a few deals as much as 35 or 40% of the entire partnership eventually. And we have special ways of looking at that. And then we do seed capital and A rounds and some B rounds around these. So we have the teams of people that are active. Now, how do we make decisions on the seed stage? This is what Katu was talking about. We have 2 general partners and 2 partners. And so we don't put them through the same rigor that we do on regular deals. And the point is, our expectations are, our hope is high, but our expectations are not high. That these will graduate to being A-round deals. Katu, why don't you talk about that too?
Yeah,
So is
sure.
that more like a play money then? Or?
No, not play
It's
money.
not pay money. You know, we won't invest in a company if we don't think that it has the prospect, however minuscule that may be, of it becoming a big company. But to Dick's point, I think, you know, one of the critical success factors for us has been decentralization of decision making, because what we do is we function as teams of small teams. And as Dick mentioned, we have a team that focuses on growth equity, we've got a team that focuses on energy, team that focuses on the India side of things, or on China and whatnot. And the other thing that is, I think, important to note here is, as Dick mentioned, amongst the top firms, everyone's raising about the same amount of capital, but we do it as one fund, whereas others do it as multiple smaller funds. And in reality, if you think about it from an LP's point of view, the NEA approach is much more LP friendly, because we don't make money till we make money for the LPs. Whereas some other firms, you know, you could make money on your energy fund or your India fund or China fund, while your tech fund could tank. But yet the GPs come out ahead. And the other thing is, if you're an LP and you think, okay, you can, or you want to do the asset allocation yourself, then we're probably not the right firm for you. But if you rely on us to do the dynamic asset allocation that Dick talked about, then we are the right firm for you.
Right.
No, that's very helpful. So thank you, Katu. Let's take
Yeah,
your question.
that's all about goal alignment. That's when I talked about goal alignment with the LPs. They know that if they don't make money, we won't make money. And it's a long, hard slog to pay back $2.5 billion, let me tell you.
Yes,
I've lived through a lot of that.
that's awesome. Okay, let's take your question.
So on goal alignment, now we take it in the other direction. I've 30 plus years in the Valley, seen this about dozens of times, how the founding CEO is not the one that takes it to the next level, and oftentimes beyond that for venture funded companies. And there are a few exceptions. Companies like Intel, for one kind of reasons, Microsoft, Yahoo, where the founders were able to stay in the seat as CEOs and the top management team for a very long run. So my question to you is, the goal alignment between the founders and VCs, it is misaligned at the point where an investor wants to de-risk the next level of growth. It's perfectly understandable, which is why oftentimes somebody from the Rolodex is brought in to run the company. In your experience, have you seen other examples of venture-funded companies where the founders carried it up to 100 million or $1 billion?
I think there are a lot of examples. I mean, my former partner was the first chairman of Intel, and our limited partners included Gordon Moore and Bob Noyce. You know, when you really analyze Intel, it's a manufacturing company, first, last, and always. And the idea of the company from the beginning, when everybody else left Fairchild, only Gordon and Bob were left. And they were the two leaders of the firm. It took them a long time. Bob was passed over for a position at Fairchild parent company before he left Fairchild to help start Intel. And I think it was one of these cases where, in my book, I mean, Gordon Moore has always been the backbone of the company. And as a founder, you noticed that he never really was too obvious about being out in front. He always let somebody else theoretically manage the company while he was there. And I think that's one of the reasons that he has been so successful, is because his light hand, but strong hand in the background, gave other people a chance to, like Andy Grove, to be successful and build, you know, layers of management, which over time, you know, morphed. And I think there again, the big question is, in the interest of the company, what is in the interest of the company at each stage of the game? So I'd say that it's rare that one person can take it all the way. It's rare. A smart man can bring in a lot of other people. Look at Larry Ellison. I mean, I don't think Larry Ellison has been known for being such a management genius. I think he's been very clever about how he's a very smart man, and how he's organized the company. He's let other people actually manage the day-to-day activities in a pretty successful way. So there are, you know, and I come back to Apple as really the main thing. When, you know, I happened to witness this whole situation early in the Apple life when Jobs was, you know, had to leave the company. I thought that was a huge mistake, but it turned out to be the best thing in the world for him, because as you really think about what made Apple and what made Steve Jobs, I mean, Steve Jobs really got his chops on Next, which was a failure as a company. He learned a lot, and Pixar, which was almost an impossible company to manage. And I think having learned that, he came back, and it was, you know, the company was inches away from failure in the late 90s when he rejoined the company and brought back those failures. That question earlier, what are the failures? What do you learn from failures? He learned everything he had to give to the company from not making it in a prior, you know, finding defeat, essentially a learning experience. So the answer is, it doesn't happen very often, really, and you have to have an informed board of directors that does take the time to know the nuances of the management skills and what it's going to take to get to the next level. Unfortunately, we have so many disincentives that go along with being a director of a public company. It's hard as nails to get somebody really willing to take that risk and come aboard. But fortunately, in Silicon Valley, we still have a culture, I think, of teamwork that kind of rises above the typical East Coast establishment.
Thank you.
Hey Dick, if I may just offer one other example.
Yeah.
Fusion.io is a great example of a company that when we invested in it, the founder actually brought on a CEO that we weren't convinced about. And midway through, we actually we got rid of the CEO, the hired on CEO, and we actually promoted the founder, David Flynn, to become the CEO of the company. And the rest is history. So that's a great example of a company that we actually bet on the founder rather than some hired on guy.
You know, the other thing, we were talking about Ascend a little earlier. So the second time I went out, then by that time, Rob was retired. He was living in Pleasanton or something. And so we got to the point where somebody else was going to be made chairman. So Jim Lally, who has been with Kleiner and me, we were commissioned to go out and see Rob again. And so we went out there, and Rob said, "Uh-oh, I think I know what's coming." And Rob said, "You know, our removing him from that job was the best thing that ever happened to him." And he's written about it in his own book. And he steered a number of new companies our way as a consequence of all that. So it just depends on how you play it. As long as you play it straight, it's okay.
Okay, please keep thinking about questions. You know, Dick has so much wisdom to share, and maybe we should ask now fewer questions about NEA. I think we need questions about Dick. So let's.
I apologize, it sounds like my question may be from the previous set, but it's not about NEA at least. I'm wondering what you think is the effect of the current regulatory environment on either increasing or decreasing the incentives of startups, and what's the effect on their likelihood of success?
Well, I think, the worst thing was the worst thing that happened was Elliot Spitzer. Because what that did was to take basically the guts out of the sell side of Wall Street, and no incentives on stock trades. You put huge blockages in terms of sell side analysts being able to accurately cover companies, and so I think the regulation I think if it wasn't bad enough with Sarbox, which has been moderated to be almost tolerable, by the way, and then Dodd-Frank comes along, and Dodd-Frank has so many pitfalls in it. It's just a question of, entrepreneurs can endure almost anything. And if there's a problem to solve, they'll find their way around it. And so, despite all the regulations, I think that they're very demoralizing, and I think taxation is a big problem staring us in the face. I voted for Obama, and I've been totally disappointed in his leadership. I think the only thing he's done well is war. It's kind of the last thing in the world you'd think he'd be good at. But he did complete those missions, and you give him his credit. But every other issue I think he has failed on in terms of leadership, for sure. And I think we're facing, and I wish somebody else were running than Mitt, really, but I think he's the best we've got, and I'm not going to not vote. So I think regulation, and I think he will be a tonic on regulation. I think he is a tonic on taxation, and I'm for those parts of it. I think he's shown he's a charitable guy, and not enough is made of his $2 million contributions every year to charity and things like that. He's got a good wife. He's got a lot of good things for him, but the point is regulation is stifling. The worst regulation really took place under the Nixon administration. That was when we had marginal tax rates of better than 75%. In France, 78% of college graduates want to work for the government because being able to retire at age 55 is like setting up a $5 million trust fund for you at the time you graduate from college. It's really ridiculous. And now people, because of the marginal tax rates, they're moving to Belgium or Switzerland. And, anyway, that's, so the answer is regulation by itself is just the R word.
And the French president just announced he's going to hire 100,000 fresh grads, 18 to 24. And on government payroll, because this is how they're going to create jobs in France.
Yeah,
yesterday's announcement. Okay, yeah.
It's it just doesn't kill France. I'll be surprised.
Anyway.
Yes.
Hi, Steve Shalizzi. As a history major,
Yeah.
if you could go back in time, what person would you want to have a face-to-face conversation with, and why?
Good question. Einstein. I think Einstein was one of the most human people that I've read about. Have you read the book on Einstein?
No, I haven't.
Read it. His genius actually showed very early, and he spent the rest of his life living wisdom. It's pretty amazing. Mm-hmm. The more I get into this energy business, and I can really see a lot of the elements of thinking that he did. This company, by the way, had its roots. This is pretty interesting. Do you know who Glenn Seaborg is? Glenn Seaborg was the discoverer of plutonium, and he was the guy who actually, and he was the president of all the universities of California. He had an element named after him by the name of Seaborgium, and he was. It was his idea that actually set in motion 20 years ago this idea for tri-alpha energy that was carried on by his right-hand person at the time, who's now a professor emeritus at University of California, Irvine, whose right-hand person is now the chief technical officer at the company, Austrian by the name of Michael Bindenbauer. So, I mean, it's amazing when you look at the lineage of things. That's one thing that perspective gives to you. You watch the lineage of good ideas and sometimes the accidents of history that happened that changed the whole way things are done. I'll never forget at Intel, there was a Japanese company that was trying to, jam more processors into a smaller space. And the name of the company was called BizCom. And it actually led to Ted Hoff's actually creating the microprocessor. It was all an accident. I mean, it may have happened sooner or later anyway. Vic Poor was another guy who was instrumental in doing that. But so all these things happen in a most mysterious way, but they sometimes, most of the time, get to the surface. It was a powerful enough idea. Even look at Tesla. It finally worked. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
So I have one.
Oh, there you are. I thought you'd left.
No. I couldn't leave. Dick.
Did I say that all right?
Yes, indeed. Actually, I'm going to say something about it. One thing I wanted to understand is how many people are in audience whose life is touched one way or other by Dick Kramlich and NEA. Look at that, Dick. This is so many people you have influenced so many people. Other point I wanted to say is that out of all this company Dick has invested in, being in the board and all of that, it is so humbling to know that he still remembers that I was on my hand and knee and checking the layout.
It was such a colorful picture.
Yeah, it is most amazing how this man can remember so many things and bring it up at any given time. For Silicon Graphics, one of the key things happened which was very unique. Up front in early days, there was a big fight going on. Jim Clark hated Warren Anderson, and then it got replaced by Ed McCracken, and they all hated each other. I mean, the top management, there was no love. It was all hate. Okay? So we as engineering guys decided that we are not going to look at that. We are just going to look down and just get the chip done and the system done and have a nice plane simulator, flight simulator to give it to the customer. But somehow Dick was able to manage that kind of a controversy. I still amaze, how did you do that? If you could share with everybody, that would be great.
And I don't think everybody knows you knocking a door and he was on hands and knees, so you may want to just repeat that and then address the question.
Well, as I said, Raj was there in the very beginning as part of the engineering crew, and that, out of Jim's class at Stanford came both Sun and SGI. And so we had an abundance of engineering talent. And the problem really, and the reason that people started off in such a wrong way there, is it was a put-together team to start with, other than the engineering team. And they were sort of rent of this and rent of that. And it wasn't until, Jim Clark is has a lot of talent, and he has got great intuition. And he's 80% great, and he's 20%, I call him mercurial. And so, you can't predict what he's going to do. He had a terrible upbringing, Jim did, and it really, I think, it sort of unsettled him for a long time, maybe ever. But his father used to put sand in his mother's gasoline tank. And when he was a kid growing up, and then Jim never graduated from high school. And he's a brilliant guy, and he was in the Navy, and took a test and scored 100%, and they said he must have cheated or something wrong. They gave him another test, he got another 100. And that's when he went to the University of Utah, in Tulane. And then he got to be a Stanford professor. Out of all that. And but the problem was that, so when I went to my first board meeting, and everybody started fighting. And Vern Anderson, who was about 6'6" and a nice guy, too nice a guy, And so, anyway, every time Jim would get to the end of his rope, he'd say, "Dick, can I see you for a second?" So he and I would leave the meeting and we'd walk around the parking lot and we'd talk and he'd say, "I gotta get rid of this guy, I gotta get rid of that guy, this and that, everything's wrong." I said, "Jim, calm down. Let's do one thing at a time. We're gonna get the right people in when we see the right people." So we made some changes, but you're right about the animosity that was still prevailing. And what we tried to do was put the interests of the company ahead of individual interests. And until actually what happened, and I think it was a big mistake, we had, in lockstep, we had compensation for Jim and Ed were absolutely the same. And Ed couldn't stand Jim because Jim would come in and change the rules on the engineering projects that we were on without much knowledge. He would just come in and ding. And so it got Ed really angry. And the bottom line is simply that we held it together for about 12 great years. And then the internet came and Ed went to Washington. Never fall for politics. Never fall for politics, because he was supposed to be involved in the information highway, and while he was there in Washington, it was happening in Silicon Valley. So, I mean, that was when things went off the rails.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
It's a pleasure to hear you speak, Dick. Thank you. I'm Ramesh Venugopal from Vantage Point, and I wanted to get your opinion on leadership. You mentioned it several times. So my question to you is, what in your mind are qualities of a leader, and how do you assess chemistry in a management team when you invest?
Well, I think there's a big difference between leadership and management. I think leadership is, swallowing the pill. You believe it's your baby, you're going to love it, and you're not going to leave it. And this gets back to the founder's issue oftentimes. Founder is really in a unique position with regard to the organization that he or she is involved in, because it's a relationship that is familial in many ways. And so I think it's a role of a founder to be bigger than himself, and be willing to pass the mantle on to other people who he believes are better managers. Because, as I said, I don't much like super organizational corporate type of things. I mean, I just don't have any time for it, because I think there's so much wasted motion in that. It doesn't appeal to my sense of soul or sense of efficiency, either one. And so I think the founder has to subordinate himself to the best interests of the company and lead by example. That's what it is. Whereas a manager, I think, can be judged on conventional metrics. And sometimes a manager, the people who are outgrown, generally speaking, are the managers, not the founders, not the leaders. But if something happens, that managers can destroy leaders, and I think that's a very bad thing. And that's usually when there's a crisis at a company. And that's kind of what happened at SGI when I really think about it, because Ed ultimately destroyed Jim. And that's when Jim said, "I don't need this anymore." Isn't that right, Raj?
Yes, absolutely.
That's the way it is. When you see it happen up close and personal, boy, it's pretty obvious what's happening. But that's where it gets back to knowing, what makes companies tick. It's and it happens all sizes of companies. It can be garage shop to, General Motors.
Okay, thank you. We have a question in the back.
Yeah, sorry, don't get a chance to see you very often, so I want to ask another question. So you mentioned that you spent a lot of time trying to understand the technology consequences.
Right.
Wondering if you can share some of the techniques or tools or resources that you leverage that we can use as well. And then another follow-up question on your comment on Mitt Romney. Paul Ryan, his view on alternative, just in general, the energy and the environment is, well, I just wanted to hear your view on, what do you think?
So,
what did, you know,
So Dick, just a question on politics, I just want, TIE is a really non-political, non-religious organization. So to the extent that the question has to do with how does it help entrepreneurship, how does it help business, how does it, economy, I think we have to, keep that within that context, okay, yeah, so.
So let me see, your first question again was,
The technology, how do you study?
Oh, well.
I mean, maybe because you have such a great memory, so you, I'm just trying to know how, I'm trying to.
I'm a great I read a lot.
You're a gifted man,
Well,
yeah.
I appreciate that. But I mean, I really do, I try to read, efficiently, so that I am well versed in a lot of different things. And it's just the way it works. And I listen a lot. I think listening is a huge thing. And listening carefully, as I talked about the market, will tell you if you listen. You don't put yourself in front of it. You let the market come to you and you listen carefully. It'll tell you what to do. I mean, I was talking earlier about this company I'm involved in right now. That is, I mean, it was really one of the biggest disasters I've ever seen. And I inherited this thing, and it looked to me, I couldn't stand being involved. I said, I'm never going to try to do this again. And then all of a sudden, out of this, a new person came in charge, and thanks to some really talented engineers that were in the company, a man named Mehmet in this particular case, he came up with a fabulous outcome, and it changed everything from being a single point of failure company to a multiple point of winning. I mean, and we're just in the early stages of this, but it's clear to me it's going to happen. So I think in the course of that, I learned a lot about the business, and out of frustration, really. I couldn't figure out why this was so bad. But it's a, I've always been a glass half full kind of guy. What I really like to do is solve problems. It's just the way I think our business is solving problems every day in every way. And just, I hate problems, but I like to solve them. It's just a personal characteristic. And this other matter that was raised here about people making money, this guy that I mentioned who was Bob Garrett, who had developed PowerPoint, he came to me about 2 years later and he said, I want to show you how many millionaires you helped create out of this one company. There were 500. I couldn't believe it. Now about Paul Ryan, all I say is I've never seen, I watched what's going on. Mitt Romney, the only time I've ever seen him really relaxed is when he named Paul Ryan as his running mate. I don't know what that means, but I'll tell you, my wife and I went to the Ideas Festival in Aspen, at the Aspen Institute in June. And one of they are nonpartisan, so they have people on all sides. This was really interesting. The guy who wrote the book, The Real Romney, was giving a lecture or talk about his book. He was with the Boston Globe, and and it was really, he's been covering Romney since the middle '80s, and he talked about his career at Bain & Company. And he said, he has gone back and dissected all the investments that Bain made. Which ones were the good ones? Which were the bad ones? Romney was there during all that time, beginning of Bain. I know, being in kind of an adjacent business, Bain had a good reputation for doing it a special way. And I'm not really a private equity guy. I don't sort of like that approach too much financial engineering for me. It's not saying it's not a good thing, all that. But anyway, Bain is sort of on the fringe of that. They were the only one that was really more on the equity side of things. But anyway, this author made the point that Romney actually didn't come up with any good ideas. That he was, his partners were, this is about saving yourself, saving your partner from himself, that when Mitt Romney would come up with an idea, and actually in the case of Staples, It was a fairly small deal, and he actually did some good groundwork that convinced him that it was a good idea. But in every other case, he said when Romney would come up with an idea, Romney would clench his fist like this, and the other partners would say, you know, Mitt, that really isn't a good idea. You know, doing this. But when other people would come up with ideas that were good ideas, Romney would get behind them. He said the success of Bain was because of Romney's validating or backing others' good ideas. I thought that was a really interesting insight into this fellow we have running for president. And maybe that's good enough, you know, and maybe, and when I think about Paul Ryan does know what he's talking about. And you don't have to agree with him on everything. And in fact, I categorically don't agree with that whole ticket on social issues. I just don't. But, you know, I think the business of the country is business. And so that's what I'm coming to a conclusion on.
So I think you already have your question, so we're coming to close to the end now. So Dick, you'll be around for a few more minutes, maybe
Sure.
people can talk to you. So one just last question. I think I know there are no other questions. So if you could just now talk about that, and you've been in business for so long, and you know all the wonderful experience you have in life. So what is it that makes now Dick Crumblick Dick? So what is it? What gets you up every morning?
Well, I've always been in love with the idea of growing, and growing personally and growing companies, seeing people succeed, you know, and putting wealth to work in a good way. That's just my religion almost. And so that gives me a lot of pleasure. I like to see, you know, you merge that company into Broadcom, and for example, and I love to see, you know, the success we had for 12 years at SGI before it slipped into non-relevance. Didn't fail really, but I love to see, you know, the ascents of the world. And I don't like failure. I can't stand losing. I'm a real competitor. And so when I didn't sign up for any 814 because it's a 15-year commitment. And no matter how much of an optimist I am, I don't think I want to be doing this for 15 years. And so, you know, I'm about to kind of go to going to be a resident free agent. So what makes me tick is growth and freedom.
Growth, freedom, and putting wealth to good use, create more wealth, and you know, then you know, create more entrepreneurs. And, and
I mean, I play
help
tennis
society,
twice a week. You know, I work out every day. I have a great wife. We're very interested in the artwork. Our kids are all straight and strong. They're great. They work hard. When my parents never wanted to spoil me, and I don't want to spoil them. And you know, I think it's just you know, just common sense really is what it is. But I think it's just knowing who you are and being the best you can be. That's what I think.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. On that note,